I was 22 when this happened, traveling for work with a photography company that went from town to town taking church directory photos. Back then, I was always living out of hotel rooms, driving my own car across states I barely remembered passing through, and sharing these temporary stops with a rotating mix of other photographers. That week, we were in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Nothing remarkable about the place, just another quiet town with a modest hotel where the four of us stayed between long work days. One morning, I went downstairs for free breakfast, half awake, and tried to focus on the news playing on the TV in the lobby. There was a guy already there eating by himself, someone I hadn't seen before. When he looked over, I greeted him automatically, the way I usually do in public places where everyone pretends they aren't strangers for a moment. He answered back and said he was in town with construction crew. It was a sort of forgettable conversation that's over in seconds, and on my way out, I tossed out a casual, "Have a good one," without thinking. He said something about hanging out later, which I brushed off the way you do when someone says it, just say it. I didn't start putting things together until a few hours afterward. I had the morning free because my shift didn't start until late, so I went back to my room hoping to catch up on sleep after a rough night. Not long after I lay down, the hotel phone rang. It never rang, ever. So I thought maybe it was work calling with some change of plans. But when I picked up, no one spoke. This happened again, then again, until I finally left the receiver off the hook so I could rest without the interruption. When it was time to leave, I stepped out and saw him standing in the hallway. He greeted me like we'd been in the middle of some ongoing conversation, asking where I was heading. I didn't think much of it at first, still assuming it was just coincidence that he was nearby. So I told him I was headed to work. My friend Mackenzie arrived a minute later, so I went with her to the car. I mentioned the weird phone calls, and she said she had gotten some too. Later that night, a storm rolled through. Heavy lightning, loud thunder, the kind of weather that makes you stand near the lobby doors out of habit just to watch the sky. We all stayed downstairs for a bit, keeping an eye on the warnings because there was talk of tornadoes nearby. Once things calmed down, we drifted back to our rooms. A short while later, there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but figured it was one of the photographers. I cracked the door open, and it was him, the construction guy from breakfast. He brought up the comment I'd made about maybe hanging out, acting like we'd made plans. I told him I was exhausted and needed to sleep, then closed the door. Something in his tone had thrown me off, though I couldn't pinpoint why at the time. I don't remember if it was later that night or the next morning, but at some point, he knocked again. This time, I didn't answer. I called my mom, partly because I needed someone to talk to, and partly because it made the room feel less empty. While I was on the phone, I suddenly got a strong feeling that something wasn't right and whispered to her that I needed to check something. I walked quietly to the door and looked through the peephole. He was standing right there, not knocking, not leaving, just standing. Then he turned his head toward my door like he was listening. My stomach tightened, and I stepped away from the peephole for a second because I didn't want my movements to give anything away. When I looked again, he had shifted into the recessed part of the hallway near my door, like he thought he was out of sight. He kept leaning just enough to peek toward my room, as if he was waiting for a sound or movement. I moved to the furthest corner of my room and whispered into the phone, telling my mom exactly what he was doing. I called the front desk, and I'm pretty sure I messaged Mackenzie too, because she called him as well, mentioning her phone calls and the hallway behavior. The hotel eventually switched our rooms and notified the construction crew's manager. That guy was apparently told to stay away from us, and after that, I didn't see him again. Mackenzie's new room ended up having a hot tub, which felt unfair considering the whole situation, but I didn't care enough to complain. I just wanted the whole thing over with. Afterward, I watched myself more carefully. Not in a paranoid way, just more aware of how even small casual conversations can take a turn you don't expect. My girlfriend Brielle and I booked a cheap motel in Duluth, Minnesota for 2 nights because we were trying to save money, and the place wasn't great, but it was good enough. I was 20 and she was 19, and we just needed somewhere to stay for a quick trip. The first night was uneventful, and we figured we made the right call by choosing the inexpensive option. The second night proved otherwise. Sometime around midnight, someone started pounding on our door. I checked the peephole and saw a short, wiry-looking guy outside. He had jeans on, no shirt, and he looked rough enough that drugs were the first thing that crossed my mind. I assumed he was just knocking on random doors trying to get attention or money or whatever he was after. Since he eventually stopped, I tried not to think too much about it and went back to bed. Around 2 a.m., while Brielle and I were finally drifting off, I heard a voice outside, low at first but unmistakable. It sounded like the same man, and I could have sworn he said, "You and your girl are going to die tonight." For a few seconds, I tried convincing myself I imagined it. It felt too strange and too specific to be real. But then I started wondering if he had seen us earlier or had been hanging around the hallway longer than I realized. Brielle was asleep, and I didn't want to wake her unless I had to, but my nerves were already shot. So I nudged her and whispered that he might still be out there. She thought I was overthinking it until the knocking started again. We both went to the door and looked through the peephole. He was standing right in front of our door, his back to us, hands behind him like he was standing at attention. That was enough for me. I grabbed the motel phone and called the police. Brielle still thought I might be jumping to conclusions, but she didn't try to talk me out of it. I also called the motel lobby, but they told me they couldn't do anything and to let the police handle it. About 10 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled through the parking lot, then drove away without stopping. I guess they didn't see him. A few minutes went by quietly until he started talking again, louder this time. "Man," you called the cops. "You're a coward. I'll kick your ass." Then silence again, long enough to make us hope he'd wandered off. That didn't last. His voice came back, and he repeated the same line about killing us, and this time, Brielle heard it clearly. Any doubt she had vanished instantly, and she insisted on calling the police again. She was shaken enough that she explained things far more urgently than I had earlier. Another cruiser came, drove through, and looked like it was about to leave again. I didn't want to stay trapped in the room a third time, so I stepped outside and waved them down. I felt safe enough to do it since they were right there. The officers told me they had talked to the man, but didn't see anything criminal. Apparently, he'd been messing with the air conditioner outside our room, but that wasn't enough for them to do anything. I tried telling them exactly what he'd been saying, but they said they didn't have grounds to arrest him. So they left a second time, and now the guy was furious. He must have seen me talking to the police because he came back to the door, yelling about how I was a coward and threatening me again. I called the police for the third time, hoping they'd finally take it seriously. After about 15 minutes, we heard people moving around outside, and then the distinct sound of handcuffs. I can't explain the relief that washed over both of us. We heard him protesting, saying he hadn't done anything, but they took him anyway. The moment the police car pulled away, Brielle and I made a quick decision to grab our stuff and leave. We weren't staying there another minute. Luckily, My friend was awake at 4 in the morning and let us crash at his place. As we were pulling out of the lot, I glanced at the police car parked nearby. The man was in the back seat, staring at us through the window. It wasn't anger or confusion. It was just a blank, hollow stare that still sticks with me when I think about that night. My fiancée Graham and I took a short trip to Buffalo, New York a couple weeks ago, mostly just to get out of town for a few days and reset. The hotel we picked wasn't anything special. The place had that worn-down look where the carpets never quite feel clean, and the lighting makes every hallway feel a little older than it probably is. But the price was good, and they offered smoking rooms, so we figured it would work for a quick stay. We got back from dinner late one evening, sometime around 11. Graham mentioned he wanted a soda before bed, and since the place didn't have elevators, we headed for the vending machines on the lower floor. The first flight of stairs brought us to this stretch of hallway that seemed to go on forever, the kind of layout that makes you feel like you're walking inside a maze. As we started down it, I noticed one of the room doors was wide open. I didn't think much of it until we got closer. Out of habit, I glanced inside, and that's when I saw her, an older woman standing in the middle of a dark room. No TV on, no light except whatever spilled in from the hallway. She was tugging at her hair with both hands while smiling in this fixed, unnatural way. It didn't look playful or confused or anything that could be brushed off. It was the kind of expression that makes something feel instantly wrong before you've even had time to process it. My chest tightened, and I sped up a little. Graham hadn't noticed her at all, and was still walking normally. He looked around and said, "I think we went the wrong way. Let's turn around." I didn't look back into the room when we passed it again. I just focused on reaching the end of the hallway. When we finally slowed down, I leaned toward him and whispered, "There's something off in one of those rooms. Something's really wrong." He stopped and started to ask what I meant, but then we noticed a sign on the wall pointing back toward the vending machines. And of course, they were located near that same room. So we turned around again, already uneasy. And halfway down the hall, we saw something stretch out of the woman's doorway. Her arm, moving slowly, drifting side to side in a way that didn't look like any kind of normal wave. Almost like she was testing the air or trying to feel around for someone. Before either of us could say a word, her door slammed shut, and we heard several locks snap into place from the inside. I told Graham I really didn't want to walk past that room again. He tried to reassure me, reminded me the vending area was right next to the lobby and we could go straight to the desk if anything happened. So we pushed on, past the room without stopping, and made it into the small vending area tucked behind a few heavy doors. I dug through my pockets for change and started feeding coins into the machine, one after another. I only had nickels and dimes, so it was taking forever. While I was staring at the coin slot, a feeling crept over me like someone was standing just close enough to be watching. I turned toward the doorway, and she was there. The same woman, smiling like before, her expression stretched wide, standing completely still while she watched us. What made it worse was the route she had to take to get there. 3 heavy doors that made loud dragging sounds when we'd gone through them earlier. Somehow she slipped through all of them silently. Graham and I both froze. I stopped putting coins in the machine and just kept my eyes forward, barely breathing. Then she let out this high, breathy giggle, like a child trying to hold back laughter. Out the corner of my vision, I saw her cover her mouth with both hands, her shoulders lifting in a way that didn't match her age at all. The sound of it hit me harder than anything she had done before. It was so out of place and so intentional that my eyes started watering on their own. She giggled for another second, then simply turned around and walked away without saying a word. Graham grabbed the soda the moment it dropped, and we didn't bother pretending to be calm. We left the vending area, sprinted through the hallway, up 4 flights of stairs, and locked ourselves inside our room. I pushed a chair under the door and barely slept the rest of the night. We checked out the next morning. Never saw her again.